gonna, I'm gonna turn it over to Jason then.
Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. I think I should have maybe been a little more prepared. I apologize. I thought I was, but um, I apologize, everybody. Okay, can we see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, gotta get something out of my way. Okay, so um, again, my name's Jason Kendall, president of the Greentown Glass Association. Dean, I did watch your presentation. Dean sent me a link to that, so I did watch that. And you say you're not an expert, but you did a tremendous job in sharing that information. So,
Well, thank
uh,
you. Thank you.
but I've tried to kind of put together a presentation that somewhat complements that. So the people that listen to your presentation, hopefully they'll get a little bit more. But the people who didn't watch your presentation, I wanted to still give them, kind of an introduction to Greentown Glass. So I think the way I'll start. So I've got a video here that I think I want to play. And I did this with my wife, so it should work. I guess Dean or Wesley, if it doesn't, if you can't hear it or it's not working, stop me. But
Okay.
but this is an introduction video that we did for the Greentown Glass Museum. We did this several years ago. Some of you may have seen it, but we put this together as kind of an introduction to Greentown Glass. So I'm going to start with this, and I'm gonna be quiet and just let it play, and then we'll kind of go from there after this. In a small town named Greentown in central Indiana sits the Greentown Glass Museum, and it is packed full of Greentown glass. Today's collectors call it Greentown Glass, but that is a little misleading because there was never a factory that was actually called the Greentown Glass Factory. It all began in the early 1890s in a small rural town looking to bring industry into its community. Industry was the key to growing a small town into a thriving metropolis. And as the townspeople looked around, they found that a glass factory would be a natural fit for central Indiana. It took a lot of energy to heat the furnaces to melt the raw materials together to produce glass of all types. In this part of Indiana, in early 1894, natural gas was in great supply, and it wasn't long until factory construction began. The original name of the glass factory in Greentown, Indiana, was the Indiana Tumbler and Goblet Company. In 1899, it was taken over by the National Glass Company, and it became Plant or Factory Number 9, the Indiana Tumbler and Goblet Works. In the museum, you can find a scale model of what the factory would have looked like at the time. Great care was taken to ensure that every detail was as close to the original factory as possible. It was very common to see giant smokestacks rising from the roofs of glass factories. Indiana Tumbler and Goblet was originally built with two main furnaces that were circular in shape and were called pot furnaces. One of the furnaces contained 10 separate glass melting units, while the other held 8. The two stacks are evident in the model. The first expansion to the factory happened in 1897, and it added several additional tank furnaces called roaring gimlets. These tanks took about 18 to 24 hours to melt a batch. In 1898, a 60-ton melting furnace called a continuous tank was added. As its name implies, raw materials are continuously added to the furnace, so the supply of molten glass never runs out. In addition to the furnaces, the Indiana Tumbler and Goblet Factory consisted of a machine shop, which was used to create and repair the molds and other equipment, a warehouse and storage space, cleaning and packing rooms, cooling layers, which allowed the glass to cool slowly so it would not shatter. There was a hay shed and even offices. On the property of the factory was also a cooperage shop. The cooperage shop made the barrels that were used to pack and ship the glassware. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, glass was not shipped in styrofoam and plastic. Instead, it was packed in paper and straw, and it was shipped in wooden barrels. A railroad, the Cloverleaf Line of the St. Louis and Western Railway, ran along the factory. Every time the train would stop at the factory, it would carry away hundreds of barrels and thousands of pieces of glass all around the United States. Some of that glass would even make its way to Great Britain and to Australia. The factory continued to press glass until it burned to the ground on June 13, 1903. The factory was never rebuilt, but the glass products that were made at the factory are sought after by collectors today, and this museum is a showcase for those items. Items made at the Indiana Tumbler and Goblet were pressed. Molds were created by master mold makers and set into a glass press. If you study the patterns long enough, you realize that some of the molds would have taken an extremely skilled artist. While the glass press that is on display in the museum is not originally from the glass factory in Greentown, it is very similar to what would have been used. The molten glass would have been gathered and dropped into the mold by the gatherer. Then a skilled glass presser would pull the handle, which would drop the plunger into the mold. With just the right amount of pressure or just the right amount of time, a beautiful piece of glass would come from the mold. Various other tools would be used to ensure the pattern and article would meet the expected use and design of the item. The factory produced several colors in both transparent glass and opaque glass. Transparent items allow the light to pass through it, and we can see through that item. Opaque items were not transparent, and you cannot see through them. The museum has a nice display on what various materials would have been used to create the various colors. Most glass would have included the raw materials comprising of silica sand, soda ash, and lime. Then, various other raw materials would have been added to get the desired colors. At the Indiana Tumbler and Goblet Company, they would have most likely used things like uranium oxide to create the canary glass, oats for amber glass, copper oxide for what Greentown collectors call teal blue, chromium oxide and copper oxide for the emerald green color. Greentown's chocolate glass is a little bit of a mystery, but probably included feldspar and fluorspar, and could have even included things like sulfur and possibly even oats. White glass, actually called opal, contained a large number of materials, including bone ash and cryolite. Nile green was a variation of the opal and probably contained iron chromate and other materials. Indiana Tumbler and Goblet made many beautiful colors, but the two that are most famously linked to Greentown are the chocolate and the golden agate, which is often referred to as holly amber. If it were not for the creation and the perfection of those two colors, it is quite possible the factory in Greentown, Indiana, would have been shut down several years before the fire. It is also believed that a new color was being tested. However, it seems that only a few test pieces ever left the factory before the fire. A formula has been found for a color called amber rose, and it contains things like zinc and selenium. Today, collectors call it rose agate, and any piece in this color would be exceptionally rare. The first products to come out of the factory were tumblers and goblets, jellies, table glassware, and bar goods, and they were pressed in crystal glass. Packers' goods were items used for food, like baking powder, mustard, pepper, or pickles. Most of the time, these were tumblers or mugs and could have been fitted with tin caps. But evidence also shows that other items, like the various animal dishes, were also used for this purpose. Most factories during this time period produced very similar items, so many in fact that it is sometimes difficult to differentiate the products from the various factories. But there is clear evidence of many of the items that were created in Greentown. As the factory expanded, they began to add colors and tableware lines. Today, most collectors focus on those tableware lines for their own collections. It was common for these lines to include things like a berry set, which would have been a large bowl and several matching smaller bowls, a water set with a pitcher and drinkware, and the table set, which would have included a covered butter, creamer, spooner, and a covered sugar. While these may have been the more common items in the tableware line, it was not unusual for many other items to be created, like compotes, salts, various fancy bowls, and many other items. Greentown glass falls into a category of glass produced from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s called Early American Pattern Glass. The key word there being pattern. In the extremely competitive glassware industry, it was very important for glass companies to continue to create newer and more interesting patterns, so people would continue to buy those new items. The first pattern pressed at the Greentown factory was introduced in 1895 and was manufacturer number 11. Today, collectors continue to call this pattern number 11. From the time this first pattern hit the market, the Indiana Tumbler and Goblet Company continued to create new patterns in new colors. In 2019, work began to renovate the Greentown Glass Museum. One of the most exciting updates to the museum is the new layout, and it shows a timeline of the patterns and items produced at the factory. After pattern number 11 came many other patterns, and this included beehive, diamond prisms, shuttle, overall lattice, pattern 75, Austrian, early diamond, brazen shield, pleat band, Dewey, herringbone buttress, scalloped flange, teardrop and tassel, leaf bracket, beaded panel, cupid, cord drapery, cactus, invincible, holly, and finally, what most people believe was to be the next pattern to be debuted at the factory, probably in that rose agate color. It's the strawberry pattern. There were also other items produced at the factory, including what collectors now call novelty items. Novelties had various uses and are often exciting items for collectors to find. There is also so much other exciting glass and information to be found at the Greentown Glass Museum, and it is a great place to visit in person. In addition to a museum visit, there are many other places to find information on Greentown glass, including the National Greentown Glass Association and their junior division. Students can join the junior division and can be included in various events during the year, which includes the annual junior glass auction. Information can also be found online at www.greentownglass.org or in the book, Greentown Glass, A Collector's Guide, or as most glass collectors call it, the Blue Book. We would love to say that we already know everything there is to know about items produced at the Indiana Tumbler and Goblet Company, but there are still so many things to be learned. The most recent information learned began in 2019 when an original factory production catalog was found and purchased. A factory catalog was a book or magazine that had a listing of all the items that could be ordered from a factory in a particular year. It is believed this catalog was most likely prepared in late 1902 to be distributed for items that would be available for purchase in 1903. This catalog has provided us with lots of new information that we did not know before. We could always use your help in learning newer and more information about Greentown Glass. You can begin your journey at the Greentown Glass Museum in Greentown, Indiana.
Okay, so that was, see if I can get past this now.
In a small town named Greentown in central Indiana.
There we go. So that was our kind of our official video that we put out. If you want to look at that, you can always go to YouTube and just search Greentown Glass and it should pop up. But that was kind of a basic video there. So now I'll just kind of go into some additional information. What I continue to talk about will be some repeat from that video, but it's hard to get all the information in just such a short video. Also, as we kind of go through things, please don't hesitate to interrupt me if you have questions. I guess I don't know exactly how. Maybe you wait till the end to have questions, but it doesn't matter to me. If you have a question and you want to stop me, feel free. I have that won't bother me one bit. But I'll just kind of go through what I've got prepared here. So one of the important things, at least in our minds, is how do we find the evidence, or how do we know what was produced at the factory in Greentown? So we've really tried to go back, and there's a few different things that we look at. And part of the reason I'm going to explain this now is because as we're going through the rest of the presentation, there'll be times I'll talk about evidence. And so I just kind of wanted to discuss this. So fortunately for me, I kind of grew up in this area in Indiana. Greentown's about 50-ish miles, mostly north and a little bit east of Indianapolis. I went to the local school, so I've kind of been a Greentown resident my whole life. I didn't buy my first piece till 2009. So I spent my childhood going through the museum from time to time, but it was later before I bought my first piece. But fortunately for me, I'm probably 3 or 4 miles from the original factory site. There is a new business that now sits on that factory site. So they don't really like people going out there and digging around. However, throughout the past, people have been able to go out and dig and they have found shards. So old pieces of glass that were just left over from the fire. We can assume that if those shards are buried there in the ground at the old factory site, then that's probably evidence that those products were most likely created there in Greentown. So that's one thing that we can look at. Another thing, and that's more over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to change to the laser pointer here. So as I kind of point around, and you guys can see the laser pointer here. So the first research of Greentown glass kind of started in the very late 1920s, or maybe I should say that at least the most recent documented research that we know about started in the late 1920s and mostly in the 1930s. And we have communications between a few of the earliest researchers and some of the original glass factory workers. So we have those copies of those letters, so we can go back in through those letters and those researchers ask questions. It's great information. And even if we think about the 1920s and the 1930s, the factory burnt down in 1903, so that was still 2, 3 decades after the fire happened. So, even from these letters, we get a lot of information. Then the other place that we look for information is what we call old catalog cuts. So back in the day, and the one lady I was speaking to said she's got magazines, but back in the day, whether it was I don't think Sears and Roebuck was a company back then. I think maybe it was a little bit later when Sears, but they sent out magazines, books, and they advertised items. So oftentimes we can see a catalog cut and see what was included in there, what they called it, what it was named. So that's kind of where we get our evidence as far as what could have been produced and at the Greentown factory. So one thing that I guess I get asked often is, how do you know something might be Greentown glass? One of the ways that we can often tell is by the color. Greentown made fairly distinct colors. And so if we come across a piece and it's just not the right match or the right color, we say, probably, likely it wasn't produced at the factory. And I do know, after I watched, Dean, that original presentation that you did several months ago, somebody had indicated that they didn't realize that the factory in Greentown made so many colors. They thought maybe it was just chocolate glass, but Greentown really did make a tremendous number of colors there. They did start with clear glass, and Greentown's clear glass was pretty distinct. It was absolutely beautiful. I mean, they just did a great job of making it crystal clear and very pretty glass. After that, they started with this. Today's collectors call it canary, but a lot of glass people will either call it Vaseline glass or uranium glass. But Greentown collectors call this yellow color canary. And yes, it does glow under a black light. Kind of exciting. Some people like to collect those pieces and shine a black light on them. And then Greentown did make other of these transparent colors. So if you look down here in the bottom right-hand corner, the green is what we call emerald green. There's this kind of golden brownish we call amber. And then there's also the cobalt blue color. Those are other colors that are pretty popular and distinct to Greentown. Now, there is a color here, and I don't know if you can see these two blue creamers. Um, it's kind of an interesting relationship between these colors, or maybe it's not relationship, but when we look at these two blue creamers, the one on the left-hand side is a color that we call teal blue. I've talked to other glass people, and they kind of say, "Well, that's not teal. Teal has more green in it." Or my wife's the color person. But we call that color teal blue, as compared to the one on the right is what we consider cobalt blue. So a much darker. Uh, Again, an oddity, and I just don't know why. But if we look at the pattern lines, so for example, here's a picture here that's cord drapery, and the picture down here that's teardrop and tassel. If we look at the pattern lines, they are almost always cobalt blue. So if we find those pieces in blue, they're almost always cobalt blue. Anything in a teal blue, like this little creamer here, would be exceptionally rare. As compared to novelty items in animal dishes, so here's a little wheelbarrow, here's a Dewey bust. I don't have a picture of a teal blue animal dish on here, but yeah, there's Dean's wheelbarrow right there. For all those items are typically found in teal blue, and to find any of those in cobalt would be exceptionally rare. There's a cat on a hamper. There's a great example of one of the animal dishes in teal blue. So I, I don't know why. I mean, there's theories how and why they use cobalt versus teal, but that's just what they did. There's lots of times that fellow collectors and I, and maybe you do the same, but we'll sit around and we'll say, well, they did it back then, just so 100 years later we can sit here and ask, why in the world did they do that? But Greentown made a wonderful variety of transparent colors, and then also they made these opaque colors. So when we think about the colors that Greentown made, they did make a opaque white. It not extremely popular. You can find some items in that white a little more frequently than others, but not extremely common. They also made an opaque green, and today us collectors call that opaque green Nile green. If we go back and look at some of the old original letters from those earliest researchers, there's some indication that the factory possibly broke this color out into what they call an apple green and a lettuce green. This is not a very big picture, but this picture here, you can kind of tell a little bit of a difference between a lighter shade and the darker shades of green. I don't. Some people say they can tell the difference, but today we just call it all Nile green. And then chocolate glass. So like the video talked about, chocolate glass was probably most famously Greentown. They produced lots of it. Thankfully, so chocolate glass was I'll say that it was perfected in Greentown. So after the factories combined, so kind of we think about the industry back then. There was the United States Glass Company. They were and now I'm talking to other glass experts, so I apologize if some of my information is incorrect, but at least the way I understand it. But the United States Glass Company was one of the largest and most dominating glass companies of that time. And it was a little bit more difficult for some of the smaller glass factories to try to compete and operate and be profitable against a big company like that. So a large number of glass companies joined together, and they became the National Glass Company. And the factory in Greentown was that factory number 9, the Indiana Tumbler and Goblet Works. And because of that combine, there was some management issues, some disagreements on how the company should be run. But because of that, and thankfully for Greentown, a glass chemist, Jacob Rosenthal, was sent to Greentown, and while in Greentown, he perfected this chocolate formula. I suspect he might have been working on it before he arrived in Greentown, but fortunately, that didn't make much of a difference because Greentown gets the credit for it. And again, it's most famously Greentown. I suspect, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I suspect that the chocolate formula was part of the reason the factory in Greentown remained open longer than they possibly could have. Um, but a great color. The other color that is famously Greentown is the color that we call golden agate. A lot of collectors today call it holly amber. But the actual color is golden agate. The reason they call it holly amber is because usually when we find this color, it's actually pressed in the holly pattern. So all these items are considered holly. The pattern is holly, and then the color is golden agate. Also perfected by or also created by Jacob Rosenthal while he was in Greentown. After the popularity of chocolate probably started to die off, we think the golden agate is continued to help support Greentown and the production they were doing. What's interesting and unique about golden agate is it's a very heat sensitive glass. So the way that the formula worked, if the formula cooled too slowly, then it became white. So in this example here, if we actually look at this piece, any area that is this kind of goldenish amber color, those panels tend to be a little bit thinner. And when the glass was pulled out of the mold, those items cooled a little quicker, and the glass maintained that goldenish amber colored. The milk white panels, those panels are thicker, so they would have cooled more slowly, and that's kind of allowing that glass to turn more to that milky white color. We can sometimes see, and if we look at this sugar dish here on the bottom left-hand corner, and along the bottom of the lid, we can kind of see that some of that amber color turned a little bit whitish. And because the glass was heat sensitive, sometimes glass would have to be reworked. They'd have to put it back and rewarm it back up to give it its shape. And because it was heat sensitive, any area of the glass that was warmed too much often turned white like that. So it's not unusual to see pieces that have a little bit more of that milky white to it. Commonly, pitchers tend to have a lot of milky white color to it. Cruets, there's a little cruet, not a very good angle of this cruet down here in the corner, but cruets tend to have a little less of the amber color and more of milky white color. I'm sure, as you all know, it's in the eye of the beholder. I kind of say it's ugly, but that's not correct because other people really like that whitish color. But golden agate was the other color that's famously Greentown. And actually, if we think about the area, the genre of early American pattern glass, so the video kind of indicated the mid 1800s to the very early 1900s, maybe early 19 teens. But in that area, it's my understanding that this particular glass, this golden agate, is the only glass that's considered art glass by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So kind of has an interesting place. There were people who tried to reproduce this color after the fire happened. A curiosity, and I don't know why for the life of me. The formula wasn't kept and reused, but there were some other companies that tried to recreate this color, but you can typically tell that it's just not quite the same. It was attempted to be reproduced, but usually when you look at the item, you can, if you spend a little bit of time looking at it, it's just not the same color quality. Jacob Rosenthal went on, and he kept producing glass or continued to work for glass factories producing glass. So I just don't know why he never recreated that color. But I think it's absolutely beautiful. But So now I'm going to jump into the pattern section. I'm going to briefly go through the patterns, not because I don't think it's important, but because it's a lot. I mean, probably we could have a couple hours just talking about all the various details of all the patterns. And the other reason is, and I know Dean mentioned this and showed this item on his video when he did it, but there are a lot of interesting items made at Greentown that are kind of one-offs. And I think Dean has a ruffled eye pitcher in his collection. And they made a pitcher. I think it's a pretty piece, but that's all they made. Why didn't they make a we don't know. But Greentown had a lot of those types of items. So I've got what I think is a pretty good list of most of the patterns. And as I go through them, I'm just going to try to highlight some interesting details on these patterns. And again, please, if you have any questions, stop me. I'm happy to go into more detail. But so the first one we'll kind of discuss up here is what we call pattern number 11. And back in the video, it said the first pattern line that was produced in Greentown is pattern number 11. And pattern number 11 mostly came out, and it was pretty much all clear glass. It was really before the factory started using much color in their glass. So we find it mostly in clear, although we do find some pieces like these up here that have some ruby staining to them. Now, if we go back to those old original research letters, there's some information that indicates that it was likely that the factory did not do the ruby staining, but people took the pieces afterwards and did the ruby staining. There's some information in one of those old letters that said there was a factory worker that would take glass during the summer shutdowns. Here in Indiana, it gets pretty warm in the summer, and working around those furnaces, it was not unusual for them to close during those summer months. But a factory worker would take pieces of glass and then decorate them and then sell them at local carnivals and fairs and different things like that. Another pattern that was made there in Greentown is this pattern called Beehive. Beehive is not a very large pattern line. For the most part, the only thing that you're ever going to find are pitchers and drinkware. So whether it's a goblet or a wine or tumblers, that's pretty much all you're going to find other than this vase. Again, why a vase and drinkware? I don't know. But that's what we find. Beehive is pretty specifically also clear glass, although there are a couple of examples of this vase known to exist in amber, so that brownish color. And then there are a couple of tumblers that have been found in chocolate. Another pattern down here is this diamond prism pattern. And similar to Beehive, not a lot of pieces in the pattern, pretty much just drinkware, a pitcher, tumblers, and wines, goblets, things like that. I like this picture because the diamond prism pattern, and I wish I was this smart, but if you see me looking down, I do have my notes. So, but diamond prism pattern was introduced in 1896. The chocolate glass formula, again, going back to the video and when Rosenthal was in Greentown, but it really wasn't introduced until late 1900. So this is good evidence that those old molds were pulled out. They must have been set in storage, and they would have pulled them back out and used them again in things like chocolate. Another interesting thing about this picture, oftentimes a lot of us collectors will use the phrase "hidden in plain sight," and one of our other members did a presentation on this many years ago, and what we mean by that is oftentimes there's those pieces out there that you might look at and you think, oh, that's no big deal. That won't be very. I've done this myself several times. That's no big deal. I don't want to pay $30 or $40 for that piece. I'll be able to find it cheaper somewhere else. Sometimes that is just not correct. This clear tumbler is exceptionally hard to find. I was able to find this chocolate one, and I owned it long before I was able to find a clear one, and I just can't remember ever seeing another clear one for sale. So I always like those hidden in plain sight pieces. Another pattern line over here in the corner is Shuttle. Shuttle was actually a pretty large pattern line. They had the table set, so you could butter and sugar and creamer. They had water sets with the pitchers and tumblers, and pretty specifically, all Shuttle glass is found in clear. Now I know I've only got the one sugar here that's clear and Shuttle, but there were again another example of the factory pulling a few pieces out and pressing them again into chocolate glass. The tumbler, the punch cup, and the mug are fairly commonly found in chocolate. Any other piece in chocolate would be pretty rare. The mug, again, for some reason, the mug was also you can find it in emerald green, cobalt blue, and amber. Why just a mug and why those colors? Again, we don't know, but Shuttle's a pretty large line, very pretty line. We have another line here called Overall Lattice. Overall Lattice was also a pretty large line, lots of pieces in it. An issue with Overall Lattice is there was another factory in Indiana that also made a pattern very, very similar to Overall Lattice. It was the glass company's name was BD Brady, and they have a very similar pattern to this. I've always in my mind, I do the newsletters for the association. I've always wanted to do an article on exactly what the differences are between Greentown's pattern and BD Brady's pattern, but I've just not got that done yet. And I would have to do some research on that because, to be honest with you, I couldn't tell you all the details myself on the differences. But Overall Lattice is another pattern that's pretty much found in clear, although there is a picture known in emerald green. It's currently in the Glass Museum there in Greentown. And then I've heard there's a couple pictures that exist in canary, so that Vaseline glass, but I've not seen those. Then we have pattern 75. So sometimes I get in trouble because I open my mouth, and I shouldn't, but I do it anyway. But pattern 75, we do consider it a Greentown pattern. If you look closely, it's very similar to that first pattern we talked about, pattern number 11. Pattern 75 is most often found in clear and then also the emerald green. But this is my opinion only. There's only one piece of pattern 75 that was actually made in Greentown. There's another factory, McKee Glass Company. I believe they were over in Ohio, I'm pretty sure. But McKee Glass Company made a pattern, and it's advertised highly, called Champion. And it is identical to this pattern 75. So McKee was also another company that was part of National Glass. And the only evidence that we have that pattern 75 was made in Greentown is there are, well, I shouldn't say only, there are some shards, but then we also have a catalog cut that shows the large drinking tumbler. I suspect that, and that drinking tumblers also can be found in chocolate glass. I suspect that at some point, the National Glass Company thought it made sense to send the tumbler mold to Greentown. And so Greentown did make pattern 75. But I'm just not convinced that other pieces were made in Greentown. Now, that is strictly my opinion. I guess you are recording this, so now it's on the record. But regardless, it's still collected as a Greentown pattern, and I certainly could be wrong. There's others that would say I am wrong. Although, and I thought of this morning, there is a canary piece of pattern 75 that exists. And I've not had time to look at this, but I'm just not sure that McKee made that Vaseline or that canary glass. So I thought of that this morning, and I'd have to look more into that. But that's kind of pattern 75. Down here, we have a very simple and basic pattern called pleat band. It's also a pretty large line. It may be one of the largest lines, but you can find, again, sugars, creamers, butters. You can find compotes, drinking sets, all bowls, all kinds of things in the pleat band pattern. And this creamer doesn't do a very good job of showing it, but typically if you find a piece of pleat band, it is normally just a crystal clear, beautiful piece of glass. Pretty much all clear, although there is a shard, so a broken piece of pleat band that exists in canary. I don't think that a full piece has ever been found, but maybe somebody was playing around, who knows. Then we have scalloped flange, another mostly clear pattern line, very, very detailed by the bands that wrap around it. Again, a relatively large line. You can find the table set. You can find a drinking set in the scalloped flange. There are a few pieces that exist in this chocolate color. So the vase, and then also you can find tumblers in chocolate. And then also this Nile green vase exists. Those are pretty much the only ones that we know of in another color besides clear. Now, equal to what I was talking about with pattern 75 as far as McKee sending items to Greentown, scalloped flange is an example of an item being sent to McKee Glass Company. There are some catalog cuts that we have found where this vase sits alongside everything else is a McKee item that we know is a McKee item. So doesn't 100% guarantee that, but that sure does give us evidence that probably this mold was sent to McKee and pressed there. Probably the most common piece found in this entire pattern is the chocolate vase. There seems to be lots of those out there. Now, brazen shield. So I'm on the record. I'm going to get myself in trouble again. Anybody who's listened to me talk for longer than maybe a year or two knows. I don't believe brazen shield was made at Greentown. Now, we do consider it a Greentown pattern. I absolutely could be wrong. But here's kind of what we know about brazen shield. So we do know that brazen shield originated in a company here in Indiana. And I apologize. I think it's Central Glass, I think is the glass company. So it was started being pressed by Central Glass Company. And then the story goes that the molds were sent to Greentown and it was pressed in Greentown. It's found in clear or this beautiful, beautiful cobalt. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, this cobalt blue. Some of the information we have indicates that one of the earliest researchers of Greentown dug up lots of shards of cobalt blue at the factory site. That researcher was a doctor from Michigan. Her name was Dr. Ruth Herrick. She was a doctor up around Grand Rapids, Michigan, and she spent lots and lots of time here in Greentown, Indiana at the factory site digging. Tragically, she was killed in an auto accident, actually returning back to Michigan from a Greentown glass convention. So she had been in Greentown for a convention, and while traveling home, she was killed in an auto accident. At that time, all of her, she wasn't married, didn't have kids, so all of her, everything she had was either donated to the Grand Rapids Museum up in Michigan or to a museum in Indianapolis. Several years ago, the Grand Rapids Museum decided to deaccession all the shards that she had. And there are 20, 30 large boxes of shards, and they were given to the Greentown Glass Museum. So we have all those shards, and I have not seen one piece of a cobalt blue brazen shield shard in those shards that were given to us. Now, again, not everything she had was given to that one museum. Could they have been somehow moved somewhere else along the way? Possibly. But I just, so I don't, I just don't have any evidence that Brazen Shield was made in Greentown, other than people who say, well, you know, we found a shard. Okay, well, can I see it, please? Well, I got it somewhere. Um, but that's my opinion. Um, I very well may be wrong. Regardless, we collect it as a Greentown pattern. Like I said, that cobalt blue is stunning. It is absolutely a beautiful pattern. Dewey. Dewey was another large pattern that came out of Greentown. Dewey may be, it's at the top of one of the most popular patterns of Greentown. And if I remember correctly, Dean, from that video, was it Wesley who found a piece of chocolate Dewey up in Canada? Somebody on that video found a piece of
Yeah,
chocolate Dewey. Okay.
that's my
Okay.
only piece of Greentown.
Okay. Yep. Dewey is a fairly common pattern. Dewey, interestingly enough, was one of the few patterns that left the factory with a name, not a number. So generally, when glass left the factory, anybody who was going to order it would order it by its manufacturer number. Now, I have not spent a lot of time discussing those here, but the example is pattern number 11. It was number 11. If you wanted to order it, you ordered number 11. Dewey was one of the few patterns that left with the name Dewey. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here in a little bit. But that's just kind of an interesting tidbit about that. Then we have the Austrian pattern. Austrian was another very, very large line. It's Austrians kind of gets credit for, or at least in my mind, gets credit for the fact that glass could be purchased by what's the best way to put it? By the maybe the middle class, or by the working man. Anything like this, if you look at these are pretty detailed. Prior to pattern glass, to get any of that type of glass effect, you would have had to grind those patterns in there. So it would have taken a skilled worker a long time with a grinding wheel to put that pattern in there. But with the molds and the actual glass press, they were able to replicate what was considered a glass cut look over and over again. And so that really brought down the price of glass, and everyday people could bring pretty beautiful, brilliant glass into their homes. Most often, and I know I don't have a lot of examples of this, but most often Austrian glass is found in clear. But we also find it, the second most common would be in this canary color. So the Vaseline glass. It typically brings a little bit more if you go to buy a piece, but it's very, very pretty. There are some pieces that we find in chocolate. Specifically, it's pretty much the table set. So again, a table set would include the butter, creamer, sugar, spooner. We can find it in this size, and also the child set size. And then there are some other odd one-off colors, like we can find wines in emerald green, and not many of them, but there's a few of them out there. These vases in the Nile green color. Again, the only two pieces that we know of in Nile green, or the only pieces we know of in Nile green, are the vases. There are a few of them out there. I purchased these two together. Originally, I'd never intended on keeping both of them. They were on eBay many years ago, and I thought I'd always sell one off. And then as I got to talking to the seller indicated that these two pieces had been together for over 100 years. How and why that came about, I have no idea. But once I realized that, I just didn't have the heart to split them up. So they still remain together. But Austrian's a very pretty large pattern line. Then we have early diamond up here. Early diamonds, again, it's a decent size line. Almost always found in clear glass. You can find the pitcher and tumblers. Although I will say, another item that's hidden in plain sight is a clear early diamond tumbler. I had the hardest time ever finding one of those. I passed one up once thinking, oh, that's no big deal. I'll find those. Those are for sale all the time. And then I went looking for one, and it took years for me to ever find one. But you can find butter dishes and sugars and creamers and different things like that. Again, mostly clear, but there are a few examples of canary or the teal blue. There's a few things in emerald green, and you can find the tumbler in chocolate as well. There is a pattern that was produced by another company, and I apologize, I just don't know the other company's name, but it's called Icicle. Looks very, very similar to this pattern, but it's a little bit different. If you look real close, especially like in this picture, on early diamond, the diamonds are smooth and the outline diamonds are ribbed. On those icicle pieces, it's reversed. So the outline is smooth and typically the diamonds have the ribs in them. So a little bit different there. Then we have herringbone buttress. Another very large line, almost always either found in the clear glass or it can be found in this very pretty emerald green color. They say that herringbone buttress was fire polished, so to kind of give it a little bit of a different look than some of the green, and it does look a little bit different, but it's just absolutely gorgeous. There are a few pieces of amber that exist out there, but just not a lot of that. Teardrop and tassel. This is another pattern that came out of Greentown. This is again, this is me speculating. This pattern has a little bit of an interesting history. I think if trying to track down what was made when and how, I suspect that this pattern was introduced just as the factory in Greentown was merging with the National Glass Company. I think that it kind of got lost in the mix. And the reason I think that is we can commonly find teardrop and tassel in clear. We can find it fairly regularly in cobalt blue, and we can find it fairly regularly in emerald green. Amber is pretty difficult to find. I always tell people if you ever see a piece of amber teardrop and tassel, get it, because it's way rarer than what we think it should be. I think that because of the commonness of some of these colors, I think it was being produced early on, and then the combine happened, chocolate glass happened. I think it was put away, and then I think it was pulled out later, maybe even as late as 1903, and it was reused again, specifically in the Nile green, the opaque white, and the chocolate. And part of the reason I say that is because if we look at what pieces can be found, you just simply can't find. So, for example, these Nile green compotes. These compotes can be found in clear, most commonly clear, but they also can be found in Nile green, or they can be found in chocolate, pretty rare in chocolate. But they are never, I have never seen one in any of these three colors: the emerald green, the amber, or the cobalt blue. So I think that they pulled it out and maybe added some new molds to it after some of these colors were introduced, and we're going to produce more of it before the fire happens. So it's just kind of an interesting piece on that. Then we go to beaded panel.
Jason, hold on for a
yes.
second.
Yep.
Okay, so going back to teardrop and tassel, would that possibly, because I've got two tumblers, I've got a clear tumbler and a cobalt tumbler, and they're different designs.
Yes.
You think they possibly remade?
I remember you talking about that at that, and after you said that, possibly. Okay. And that has been always, at least as far as I've ever seen, cobalt blue tumblers are always full pattern. Emerald green are always half pattern. I have never been able to find a half pattern cobalt blue or a full pattern emerald green. Again, both of those colors were produced at the time I would have said would have been earlier. Um, there are some Nile green tumblers, and they tend to be full pattern tumblers. So that's a great question. I just don't know
Okay.
the answer to it, but you
Okay.
are correct. There are two styles. Um, why that came about, and I think most people recognize that most factories would have created multiple molds for an individual item. So if you were going to make a pitcher, maybe you had two or three molds that were supposed to be exactly the same, just because you were producing thousands and thousands of pieces of glass, and after time, those molds just began to wear and became not as good. Um, did somebody get lazy that day and just not complete it? Did they rework it? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that one.
Okay.
Great question.
All right. Thanks.
Yep. Another pretty pattern is beaded panel up here in the corner. Almost always found in clear glass. Um, and there is, for some reason, a couple of these white syrup jugs that exist. Only thing that we can find in any other color are the white syrup jugs, but most of what we see is in clear, and it is all clear, even though the stippling, I think that's how you say that word, almost gives it a bit of a frosted look. It is all clear glass. Um, then we have Daisy. Daisy is the third pattern um, that I suspect was not made in Greentown, but again, I could be wrong. Um, but Daisy is we find it oftentimes in chocolate, white, and then either usually it's in this frosted green, but sometimes in a true green. But again, Greentown didn't really do anything frosted. I know there's a process with the glass to get that frosted look. If Daisy was made in Greentown, the green wasn't. We do know that Daisy was also made at McKee. Um, some people indicate that there's some shard evidence that there were pieces made in Greentown. Um, but we do know, so I meant to cover this earlier and I didn't, but we do know that Rosenthal perfected that chocolate formula in Greentown. But again, Greentown was part of the National Glass Company, and because of that, that formula was also used at other factories. So we know that chocolate was pressed at McKee. There was another company called the Royal Glass Works, and we know that chocolate formula was used there. There is some slight variations to the colors. Sometimes you can look at it and it's just got a little bit of a different shade. In the video, we talked about that we don't know the exact formula of chocolate glass, but mentioned that possibly it could have used oats. I mean, could there be a difference in the oats that were grown in Indiana versus the oats that were grown in Ohio or somewhere else? Maybe I don't know that, um, but we do know that chocolate glass was pressed at other factories, and today it's typically collected. We consider it non-Greentown chocolate, so using the Greentown formula, just not pressed it in Greentown. And I suspect I did an article in a newsletter a few years ago about the daisy pattern, but I think that it's more likely that this pattern was pressed by McKee. Um, but again, we do collect it as Greentown. So another nice. It's a pretty short line. There's only four pieces known in daisy: a butter dish, a sugar dish, a creamer, and then also I think it's considered a mustard jar, um, which seems weird. I don't know why. Typically, a table set would have included the butter, sugar, creamer, and spooner, not necessarily a mustard. So could it have been a covered spooner? I don't know. I mean, maybe we've seen that before. I mean, a covered spooner doesn't make sense, but we've seen that some before. Another pattern is leaf bracket. So leaf bracket was the first pattern, and it was actually created for the chocolate glass formula. So very, very common to find leaf bracket in chocolate, and there's lots and lots and lots of it out there. Um, and it can be very pretty. We can find some leaf bracket in clear. And then there are some other colors. Very seldom do we see it in a white. There's one known example of this butter dish that exists in cobalt blue. It's owned by a collector here in Indiana, and it is on loan to the Glass Museum. So our guess is that was probably what we call a lunchbox special. Somebody liked cobalt blue, and it was the end of their shift. They threw a little bit of glass into the mold and came out with that piece and took it home in their lunchbox. But very, very pretty. Um, and again, I think leaf bracket was well. I'm going to discuss a little bit more about leaf bracket and the chocolate formula here in a little bit again. But we have Cupid. I realized as I was rewatching that video that I said Cupid in the video, but I didn't show a piece of Cupid in there. But Cupid has exactly like what's in the name, little Cupid um, in, I don't know if it's flowers or leaves or what it is, but and typically we can find Cupid in either clear, this white, the opaque white. It can also be found in chocolate in that Nile green color. Invincible is another fairly plain line. Um, and almost every piece of Invincible I've ever seen is just crystal clear. Just very, very pretty. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to tell the difference between Invincible and then if we go back to that pattern I first talked about, the pleat band, both of them are pretty plain and simple patterns, but it's very pretty, pretty simple. Then we also have the cactus pattern. Cactus was another pattern made in chocolate glass, probably after leaf bracket kind of lost its beauty or its luster as the new in thing. They created the cactus pattern and started pressing this in chocolate glass. Um, it must have been pretty popular. When we talk about reproductions, the cactus pattern is the most highly reproduced Greentown item. As a matter of fact, Fenton actually has an entire. They have almost copied everything. And in that video, Wesley, that piece that you had, you'd kind of asked Dean about whether it was a reproduction or not. And Dean, you did get out your reproduction guide and said, "Hey, that Dewey piece was only reproduced in the large butter," and that's correct. So Wesley, that yours is definitely good. Whereas the cactus pattern, it's a little more difficult because almost every item in the cactus pattern was reproduced by Fenton. But it was almost all made in chocolate, although we do see some examples in clear, very rarely in the Vaseline, and almost never in the Nile green. I think there's only two pieces that are known to exist in the Nile green color. Then we go on to cord drapery. Cord drapery is I absolutely love it, especially this colored cord drapery. And probably I've said this a few times as far as the difference between a smaller, they didn't produce a smaller line, they didn't produce as many pieces as far as the number of items they made versus a larger line, meaning there's lots of different items they made. Cord drapery that may be the pattern that has the most different items included in it. I mean, they not only did they create the bowls, but then they also they fluted the bowls. So some of them are fluted, and there are triangular ones, and all different shapes and sizes. But it can be found commonly in crystal, and then in these colors, the cobalt blue, the amber, and the emerald green. It's pretty. If you find a piece of it, you're probably going to pay for it. But if you're not, grab it because it's going to be worth. But it's very pretty. I was going to mention this, but here's an example of a Nile green tumbler. So extremely interesting story, at least in my opinion. Another, I didn't really talk about this when we talked about how do we get the evidence of what we find. I talked about the shards. I talked about letters. I talked about catalog cuts. I guess I should have included family stories in that. There aren't many of them, but we do have a few descendants of glass factory workers that are still around. In particular, there were rumors that a Nile green tumbler existed. There's one local collector who said he saw it. He wasn't allowed to take a picture of it, but he said he saw it and he kind of knew where it was. Again, he's a reputable collector. I didn't have any reason to not believe him, but you kind of want to see these things with your own eyes. Well, about a year ago, we had a collector reach out to us, and she explained that she was I'm probably going to get this wrong, either great great granddaughter or maybe the third great granddaughter of an actual worker at the glass factory. And it was documented, and this piece actually was brought home along with a few other pieces, was brought home, and the family still owns those pieces today. So, and she still has some old letters that were written by him. And so she brought this tumbler to our convention last June, and it was the first time that we've been able to see and photograph this Nile green tumbler. So that was pretty exciting. So cord drapery is a great pattern. It can also, again, the tumbler can be found in chocolate. This is also found in chocolate. We've kind of talked about the holly already when we talked about golden agate. What I didn't mention before was that it can also be found in clear. And then this is an example of what we call a white agate holly piece. And then Greentown also made other stuff. Oftentimes we either call them animal dishes or novelties. Dean showed a picture of his teal blue cat on a hamper. But they made hen on nests. I've learned that Greentown made hen on nests, and I think every other country in the entire world made a version of a hen on nest. I don't know what it was about chickens that were so popular, but everybody made a hen on nest. Greentown hens are, I'll say this, fairly easy to spot once you know what you're looking for. I guess if somebody has a question about that, I can define that. But they also made the bird on berries and these fighting cocks. They made lots of toothpick holders like the dog head. They also made a witch head. They made the picture frames. Here's a little piece. Today we call it a dustpan. What was it used for? Was it a pin holder? So somebody who sews maybe had it sitting on their desk and they'd pull out the pins from whatever they were working on and have it sitting there. This little piece up here in the corner is actually a cigar holder. So you'd put the cigars in the middle. You'd put, your matchsticks on one side that were unlit. And then, once they were lit, you could put them in the other side. They made, we call these Indian head creamers. Here's some buffaloes. But they made lots of other little novelty items. So the fire happened in June of 1903. I wish that the fire wouldn't have happened. It's curious as to what caused the fire. The official cause of the fire was on that Sunday afternoon, just as all the workers had happened to have gone home for the day. A train on the rail line came by, and the train was missing its spark arresters. So the coal-powered train, the sparks from the coal went into the straw, caught the factory on fire. The town of Greentown really didn't have much of a fire department, and the factory burnt to the ground. So that was the original, or that's the official story of what happened to the factory. If I was going to make a movie, that's probably not what I would say happened. Kind of curious that there was another national factory that the Thanksgiving before happened to burn down. This one just happened to catch fire on a Sunday afternoon when all the shifts were gone. And conveniently, a few months before the fire, the insurance value on the factory was increased relatively substantially. But again, the official story is it was going to court. The factory was suing the railroad. However, before it actually made to court, a settlement was made and it just went away. But Regardless, the factory wasn't rebuilt, but we do have some a little bit of evidence on what was being worked on. So I'm going to kind of start up here with this white agate holly piece. So this is another piece that the family that I talked about just before brought to show us. But this is another heat sensitive item. So again, the thinner panel here in the middle cooled and it was clear. And then these thicker panels cooled and they were just a little bit thicker and they kind of turned that milky white color. So we suspect that this was probably something they were working on. My opinion, that's absolutely beautiful. I would have loved to have seen more pieces like that. There's only a few toothpicks and a few tumblers that we know of that exist. This is a relatively new thought, I guess is a thought that I've had. I did a newsletter article on the color purple recently. Um, for a long time, people have said, no, there's family pieces that were purple. So again, people say, he said, she said, we don't really know. But here, maybe it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was given a presentation on Greentown Glass to a local group, and all those people were encouraged to bring pieces and ask questions. Well, there was a wonderful lady. I didn't ask her age. She was, I would guess, probably maybe in her 80s, but she brought this mug and she asked if it was Greentown, and this was her father's drinking cup. So when her father was a child, this was what he used as his drinking cup. Yes, I mean it absolutely is a piece of Greentown. This is the Austrian pattern, but the color. As far as we know, there was really no reason to think that purple was being produced, and I call it purple again, that's my color palette, but that this color was being produced at the factory. However, we do know that glass of the time, and I don't know if this group has ever discussed this, but some of the chemical components in the glass, if it is exposed to ultraviolet radiation, it can begin to turn purple. So there are some examples of some real faint purple where somebody sets it on the window sill, and after 5 years it just has a purple cast to it. There are some people out there who will X-ray old glass, or they'll put it in some sort of an X-ray device, and it really changes it from clear to a deep purple. Um, I when I think about this piece, it's deep enough that I don't believe there's any way that it sat on a windowsill too long. I just don't think it could have achieved that color. And the ladies from the area, she said it's been in a cupboard. I mean, it was her father's. I just don't believe that she would have even known that she could have X-rayed it to get this color. And then I've actually compared this piece to other pieces I know that have been X-rayed, and it's just a different shade. So it is a complete mystery. The only other thing that I kind of wrote about in that article when I think about this purple color is where Jacob Rosenthal, so again, the glass chemist who created the purple formula, where Jacob Rosenthal ended up. So after the fire in Greentown, he bounced around a little bit, but he ended up at Fenton. And one of the first colors that began being produced after Rosenthal arrived there was I believe they call it amethyst, but it's a shade of purple, not quite this shade of purple, but a shade of purple that also has an opalescent effect around the top. So could Rosenthal have been working on some sort of a purple formula and pressed a few pieces? Maybe. I don't know. We just don't know. But um, I've been told there's another local family that owns another one of these purple cups, but again, I've not been able to locate it. Even if I did, I don't know that I'd ever be able to compare the two. But probably most tragically, is this now? These are all the same piece, but is this what we call rose agate? Now, I included 3 different pictures here because this thing is extremely difficult to photograph and really show its true it's true beauty. For some reason, a lot of times when we try to photograph it, it almost looks gray. But it truly is. You can kind of see it truly is a pinkish. The panels here are pink, and then these thicker panels, these ribs are that milky white. Um, this is a piece this is a piece of holly. The association actually owns this piece, and it's in the museum as well. But we really believe that this was another color that they were going to work on and produce at the factory. Again, why this formula was not reused, I just don't know. There was some attempts to make a pinkish color by some other factories after this, but it just was not the same. It's truly a spectacular piece. The only two pieces in existence that we know of is this spooner, and then there's a toothpick. A local collector owns a toothpick, and it also sits in the museum. It's not quite as pretty as this piece. There's rumors that there's another toothpick out there somewhere, but we've just not seen it. But we think, and here's kind of a picture again of going back to that. In the video, you kind of heard me talk about the strawberry bowl. So there's an example of that. We really believe that this was probably a pattern that was being produced for the rose agate color. So I look at that and I think about the first thing I think of is strawberries and cream. I mean, that's kind of what that looks like. Boy, that would just look absolutely beautiful in this. And if you inspect this piece and we think about how the glass color changes, these pieces here with the berries, it's a little bit of a thinner panel. So probably as it cooled, would have cooled quicker in this pinkish color. And then these blank spots are a little bit thicker, so it probably would have turned milky white. There are not very many pieces of these strawberry. I mean, the only pieces that we know of that were actually left the factory was a large bowl and then a small sauce dish. And we found them all in clear. I mean, there's not very many examples of them, but there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 of the larger bowls known to exist and maybe 8 or 10 of the small sauce dishes to exist. But we've seen lots of shards of this pattern with an attempt of some sort of a rose agate color. Oftentimes they kind of came out purplish or maybe all white. But boy, if anybody ever found a piece of actual rose agate strawberry dish, I can't even imagine. I don't know if anybody saw that piece of, it wasn't Fenton, but it was the boys who started the Fenton company, started a new company or did a new company before Fenton. And there was a piece of glass that sold last year at auction, and it sold for $250,000. I don't know if anybody saw that. If I was watching that auction live, and the bidding started at $100,000 and went straight up from there. So, I don't know. I thought that was crazy, but I'm not sure that this would bring that kind of money, but maybe it should. But also some evidence that there was some other additional opalescent work being done at the factory. Here's a few pieces that have made it out, whereas the most of it's white, and then that the edges tend to be that have that opalescent effect, that kind of that whitish effect there. So that's kind of it with the patterns. I kind of thought it might be fun. I don't know if anybody has any questions about those patterns yet, but I thought it might be kind of fun to go back and talk a little bit. Dean, do I have a time limit? I don't even know what time it is.
No, you're good.
Okay. I apologize if I'm taking too long, but I go back a little bit in history and talk about some of the interesting things that happened. But so here's one of them, and I told you I would talk about the Dewey pattern afterwards. So if we go back in history, and I apologize, I got to pull up my notes here, but and we think about what was going on during that time. So we're in the very, very late 1890s, 1898. The U.S. was actually in the middle of the Spanish-American War. And it was during that time that Admiral George Dewey, so here's Admiral George Dewey, he sailed a battle fleet into Manila Bay, and he was able to beat the Spanish battalions there, and that signified that the U.S. took control of the Philippines, and then that kind of turned the tide on the Spanish-American War. Well, when Admiral Dewey came home, he was a war hero. He was a highly decorated war hero, and you'd never believe it at the time, but capitalism isn't a whole lot different back then than it is today. There were factories who wanted to try to capitalize on this, and the factory in Greentown really wasn't any different. And so they took this pattern line, and like I said, it left the factory with the name Dewey. So that's why it was in honor of the admiral because of the Spanish-American War. Um, Now, there is some people wonder, was the pattern designed after he won that, or was it named? Was the pattern already there and named because of that? I tend to agree with the second. I would suspect that the factory would have made this color of glass regardless. It just so happened that they were ready to introduce it during this time, so they gave it the name Dewey. Some people will say, well, if you kind of look at the circular medallions here, maybe they signify the portal of a ship, and maybe these wavy lines here signify the waves of the ocean. I mean, maybe, but I'm just not real sure. There's little flowers that sit around the edges here. So oftentimes we call this flower flange. That's the other name that's given to this pattern. And if we look at this little rib here, there's kind of a leaf design in there. I'm not sure what flowers and leaves have to do with a battle battalion, but regardless, it was given the name Dewey. Now, after the Dewey kind of all that faded, it was later given a pattern number because, like a lot of other pieces, this was made in 1898, but it is very, very common to find it in chocolate. So the pattern was pulled back out in after 1900, after the chocolate formula was introduced, and we can find it in the chocolate color, we can find it in the Nile green, and we can find it in white. So just kind of an interesting tidbit and the factory in Greentown was not alone. If you go out starting to look for Dewey items, you'll see that many companies around the country were trying to take advantage of that time in history. Another, and this is one of my favorite. I just love this topic. So another event in history, and I'm going to start. I'm going to read a couple of different excerpts from different things, and I'll explain why. But the first one I'm going to read is this was in the official brochure that was put out for the Pan American Exposition that was held in Buffalo, New York in 1901. But this is how it goes. You, reader, are invited, as all the governments and peoples of North, Central, and South America have been invited through the Department of State to join in commemorating the achievements of the 19th century by holding a Pan American Exposition at the city of Buffalo in the state of New York from May 1st to November 1st, 1901, to illustrate the progress and civilization of the nations of the Western Hemisphere, to strengthen their friendships, and to inaugurate a new era of social and commercial intercourse with the beginning of the new century. So that's one excerpt, and then the other one I'm going to read was actually this was part of President William McKinley's speech, and President William McKinley was actually assassinated while he was at the exposition there in Buffalo, New York. But in his last public address, he said, "Expositions are the timekeepers of progress. They record the world's advancement. They stimulate the energy, enterprise, and intellect of the people and quicken human genius. They go into the home. They broaden and brighten the daily life of the people. They open mighty storehouses of information to the student." Why I think those excerpts are important is because I think that this exposition in Buffalo, New York, is highly underappreciated for what it did for. I can only talk about Greentown glass, but for the glass in Greentown. So when this all came about, the National Glass Company put in a bid to be able to have a some sort of an attraction there at the exposition, and they did get an attraction, and they actually built an actual glass factory at this exposition. So there were about 8 million people that went through the exposition between that May and that November timeline, and they were selling glass here at the exposition. Um, I really think that this exposition is why, number one, the factory didn't close down. So about that time, this unending supply of natural gas was actually beginning to end, and they were looking for reasons to close factories down. But I think because the factory in Greentown was producing the chocolate, and it just was so highly so many people liked it. I think that they shipped and sold a lot of it there. We can tell there are some pieces here that are actually engraved, and it was done by at the time they called it the electric pen. Now it is difficult to I'll say it's difficult to spot these pieces because even though you can see it here in black, and here's another one. We have added this black coloring to these pieces. I mean, when they scratch these words in there, you really can't see them unless you're looking for them. So if you happen to spot a piece of leaf bracket, you may take a quick peek. We sold one at an auction a couple years ago. Nobody noticed it until we were ready to ship it, and we realized, oh my gosh, that was a piece that was inscribed with Pan Am. So, but I truly think that because of the number of people that went through the Pan Am exposition who like chocolate glass, I think that's part of the reason why chocolate glass did what it did around the country. I think that this leaf bracket pattern in chocolate glass is one of the most commonly found pieces. And I think part of the reason is because they pressed so much of it for this exposition that it's still out there quite a bit. So I like that story. We're still learning. So just because all the stuff I said doesn't mean it's all accurate, or maybe we won't learn something new in the future that might change it. In the video, we kind of talked about the catalog that we found several years ago. People speculated for years and years that there had to have been some sort of a catalog that they sent out. And this one came up on eBay several years ago when the association was able to buy it, because it actually shows us items that were sold during that time. So this really helped piece together several things. Part of the reason, and again, the patterns that I named, daisy pattern, the brazen shield pattern, every other pattern that we know about has at least a piece that we see in this catalog, except for those two patterns. There is no daisy and no brazen shield. I mean, nothing that's in this catalog. So again, doesn't mean that, but it's there. We're still trying to get this information out here. The Greentown Glass Association is, I'll say, we're exceptionally fortunate. We received an inheritance several years ago. I have a tremendous board, and they were very pro do the right thing with it. So we have most of it invested. So, well, this has been happening over several years, but we were finally able to complete it. But there was a factory in a clay pot factory in Indiana, and they sold all the clay pots that factories used to companies all over the place. There was a gentleman who, after the factory had gone out of business, he went to the factory and he was able to pull all these old documents. There were, I'm going off the top of my head here, but 1,000, maybe 1,200 letters that he was able to save. The association was able to acquire those last year, and why we think they're important is not all of them pertain to the factory in Greentown. I think only 4 of the 12 or 1,500 pertain to the factory in Greentown. However, the record of the number of glass companies, there's several hundred glass companies that are recognized in these letters. And so we're still working our way through them. but we just think for the glass collecting community as a whole, acquiring these letters was extremely important because it may give us information that we didn't have before. And right off hand here, this Continental Glass Manufacturing Company. Very little known about this factory. I talked to another collector who was able to dig up a little bit of information on it, but we can see this letter's dated 1905. And interestingly, the glass on this pattern is none other than that brazen shield pattern. But we're still trying to find new information. Things change. If we can find it, boy, we'll still try to grab it, just because knowledge is knowledge. I'm almost done. I've just got a couple slides left, but here's one. If somebody is interested in something to collect, here's my commercial for Greentown Glass. So I know I have no shame, so I'll do it. But we really say that Greentown has a collection for everybody. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. If you want to, if you have an interest in older glass, Greentown has a way for you to collect it. And here's some examples of those. So some people like covered animal dishes. Julie, who joined us, I believe is a milk glass collector, but she also likes covered animal dishes. We have toothpick holders. We have salts. You said you have a shaker convention or a shaker meeting coming up. Greentown has lots of different salt shakers. We have things that if you want to collect the ultra rare things, Greentown has those. If you have a limited budget but you still want to build a nice collection, you can do it with Greentown. There's several of these pieces. Like I kind of went over the Dewey pattern, the Austrian pattern. I mean, you could the cactus pattern. You could build either a chocolate collection or a clear collection, or even some of these colored Dewey collections, and it's not going to cost you a whole lot. But we have novelties. We have if you are interested in it, Greentown has it. So there's kind of my commercial. Here's recent auctions that we've had. I like showing this because sometimes I talk to people and people say, "Oh, people don't collect glass anymore. No, people don't want to collect anything anymore." My opinion is that is absolutely not true. There are still collectors out there. I think that you guys are seeing this, and in my mind, Greentown has a lot of several younger collectors. I mean, collectors in their 40s and even some collectors that are younger. I think younger people want an experience. And so, that's just a little bit different. But here's some recent auction prices that we've seen. So here's a chocolate picture framing. And I know some of the print's kind of hard to see, but here's a chocolate picture frame. It's sold for $2,700. Here's a Nile green hen on a nest. So a covered animal dish for over $4,000. Here's a holly piece that sold for $2,000. A golden agate hen for almost $2,000. Here's a couple of pieces here's a Nile green leaf bracket nappy with damage. It's got a chip on it. It sold for $10,500. That didn't even include the buyer's premium. Here's a rose agate. Here's that rose agate toothpick I talked about. Sold for $11,500. So now, please don't let me show this to you and you think I can't afford Greentown because this is all the expensive stuff. I wanted to include this slide more just because anybody who says, "Oh, there's no value there anymore," I say that's not true. There is value. It's out there. So that kind of wraps up my presentation. The only thing I have left is, and Dean, I'm not sure if you sent this to me, but I think you kind of do a show and tell. What have you added new to your collection?
Exactly.
So I'll start it off because this is what I added to my collection this year. I got to add this cobalt blue fighting cocks to my collection. This piece actually came from Australia. So I didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, but we do know that a lot of glass ended up in Australia. We believe that Australia was being colonized. Maybe that's not the right word, but from Great Britain at the time. So we think that the glass got shipped to Great Britain and then worked its way down to Australia. So several of these, if I had the time, I could probably pay for my trip to Australia just going around looking for these, because several of these fighting cock, we call them fighting cocks. Sometimes they call them dueling chickens, but several of these have surfaced in Australia. And this one popped up last summer, and I was fortunate to be able to add that to my collection. So that's my show and tell. One of the pieces and this is in that cobalt blue color. So again, I talked about the difference between the teal blue and the cobalt blue. Um, Cobalt blue is a little more difficult to find in the animal dishes. So that's what I have. Um, so I guess I'll turn it back to you, Dean,
Okay.
or questions, or I'm happy to answer questions or talk about whatever else.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you want to go ahead and unshare your screen so we can get a little bigger, and then maybe somebody has something that they have. I mean, like I said, Wesley found a piece last time. I don't know what he may have found this time or what other people may have found. So anybody have any questions? Like I said, I asked my question. Well, yeah, I also covered talking about Brazen Shield because I think that's a fascinating pattern, but I didn't know for sure. So you've answered it better than anybody else I've heard, and that certainly makes sense.
Yeah. I don't, a lot of people don't like when I say it, but I try to only say things that I truly believe are what they are, but,
Right,
or what
right,
evidence tells me.
right. Okay, so any other questions for Jason?
And I apologize. I was worried that I was going to be over so quick that people would be like, okay, now what are we going to talk about? And it's like, good grief, it's almost getting close to 3 o'clock here in Indiana.
Very, very good program. Very, very informative. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Jason.
Oh, absolutely. If you're interested in it, join our Facebook page. Um, we're all the time trying to post things. You can get lots of great information there.
Yeah, they've got a very nice group there. I enjoy it. So, all right. So, anybody else have any show and tell that they've got? Something new that you've received? Okay. If nobody's going to go, I'll go. Gary knows me very well. It's an Aladdin Alicite. This is the Lincoln Drape. After we did, Gary actually watched the presentation. Jason, Gary's my husband. He's not really a glass collector. He just kind of got sucked into all of this because of
He
me.
just puts up with you.
Right.
My wife.
Um, we did John Parsons, who's president of the Aladdin Club, did a presentation this summer for us. And so Gary became very interested in Aladdin lamps. So
Okay. Oh,
here's
good.
an Alicite Aladdin lamp. So
All it
um,
takes is you just got to find the right item.
yes, exactly, exactly. So what else? Come on, I'm sure Phyllis or Wesley or Gwinnell, you've got something. Oh wait, Kathleen's got something.
Oh, great.
Yep, this is my one piece of glass for Christmas. It's Tiffin black satin. I don't know who did the silver, but
Is that glass?
oh yeah, it's Tiffin
Okay.
satin. It feels amazing.
Yeah. Huh. Because it almost
I
looks
don't know.
like a clay, like pottery or something, but huh, I like
No,
that.
it is
Beautiful.
Yeah.
it might be Rockwell. They did do overlay on Tiffin, and it's the right quality, but there's no mark, and I haven't seen it before. So
Okay.
there's nothing that says it isn't, but there's nothing that tells me it is either.
Okay. So who's
Well,
next?
I've got one.
Oh, go ahead.
Go on, Phyllis. You can go.
Oh, okay. Short. Okay. This is a master salt. I like the green color. Got this as a gift. And the interesting thing about this is salt collectors don't really know who produced this or when. It's assumed that it's American glass, probably from the late 1800s, like 1898, whatever. But this pattern was reproduced in the 1970s in all kind of colors. The only distinguishing part is that supposedly the glass from the 1970s has a lot of bubbles in it. So when I received this, of course, the first thing I looked at was, are there bubbles? And I cannot find one bubble in the whole thing. So I've decided, my own personal opinion, that I'm going to put this as 1898. So, but again, no manufacturer. But I thought I liked the pretty green glass. So I thought that
I
was
can rule one manufacturer out for you.
okay.
Can't tell you who it is, but I can at least rule one out.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Well, it's just it's an interesting thing. But I did get another, and I'm just going to put this up here. It's a really pretty little piece of glass. This was actually sold to my sister as a salt, an open salt. It is not, I doubt very much, is probably a liqueur glass, probably European. But it does have some chips around the edge, so that's probably why the seller decided it was a salt, because salts a lot of times have the little chips around the edge. But it's a pretty piece of glass, so it's a pretty color.
Yeah.
So
Okay, real quick, Phyllis.
oh yeah, very good. Does yours have bubbles in it?
Mine does have bubbles.
Oh, okay.
so the
So
next time-
maybe, well, yours is a little different green.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna
it
say
really
the greens
is.
are definitely different on my end.
Yeah, look, they look
Mhm.
different, but that's good.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll if I can remember, the next time I come to Houston, I'll bring it and we'll get together and see if we
Well,
can.
Is it only Greentown, or does anybody else do like the how it feels, like that oily
oh
slick?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we do that all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
All right, Gwinnell, what do you got?
Okay.
Well,
Sure.
I managed to find the New Martinsville or Viking, the Janus Tall
Oh,
Cream and
yeah.
Sugar
Nice.
in the ruby, and it also came with the tray.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
that's nice.
Mm.
That's
So-
nice. So, Wesley, what do you got?
Yeah, I've got a couple things from my trip to the antique store after Boxing Day sales, as they call them up here. So this, go higher. I left this behind originally, but then I took a picture of it, and I'm like, oh, that looks like a Bartlett Collins. So then I went home and looked at my Hazel Weatherman book too, and there it was. So I went back for it. It is what is it called? Number 416. It's called. So, and I only have one other piece of colored Bartlett Collins. You only get the more, I think the more modern Bartlett Collins, the hand painted stuff you find
Right.
a lot up here, but the colored, I only have one other piece, and it's a green creamer. So that was a nice find. And then for the Canadian glass collection, I found a Delphite fridge dish. I have the larger one, but I've been looking for a small one for a while. It did not come with a lid, but I'll have to look for a lid. So this would have been produced in Toronto between 1948 and probably 51, somewhere about there. There was Pyrex produced in Canada for a short period in the late 40s, early 50s. So those are my new finds from the antique mall.
Okay.
There's Greentown up in Canada too.
Yeah, you don't find a lot like that. The one that I found, I brought it back here for today's presentation. I found this in an antique mall a couple of years ago outside of Calgary, and there were actually two of them. They were two exactly like this.
Yep.
And I have never seen. I quickly was glancing the booth, and I'm like, wait a minute, what is that? It looks like glass. So I picked it up, and I'm like, oh, that. I'd heard of chocolate glass, but I'd never seen it before. And there were two that like this, so I got the one that had fewer chips. This does have some chips in it.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, chocolate glass. I don't have any chocolate glass at all, so I'll get that. And then I did research later and found out about Greentown.
Yep. For some strange reason, there seems to be an unusually large supply of animal dishes in Canada. I don't know why, but I have a canary hen on a nest that came out of Canada.
That makes some sense because I don't think there aren't a lot of that kind of whimsy made by Canadian glass producers. So
Okay.
they might have been sold at department stores or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So Julie, do you have anything?
I'm in the only room in my house that doesn't have glass in it. I've got porcelain, I've got wood, but no glass in this room. I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was a show and tell. But I did add about 8 pieces of Greentown to my glass collection this year. I'm new Greentown collector. And like Jason said, I love the animal colored dishes, not the hens so much, but the other items as well. I have a couple of toothpicks. I have a green and a chocolate.
Okay.
So yeah, next time.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this presentation. This was fabulous. Thank you so much.
Well, and just because I kind of straddle both worlds here with everything. Like Jason said, Greentown is out there if you can find it, and it can be affordable. I mean, now if you try looking on eBay or an auction site or Etsy or anything like that, the other collectors are going to know that it's there too, and you're not going to get a bargain with it, such as like the golden agate or some of the more unusual pieces. You're not going to get a bargain for it, but you do run across it. Interestingly enough, I've got a chocolate tall cat on a hamper, and I bought the first set at an NGGA convention in Tiffin, Ohio, almost 10 years ago now. And the one of the pieces had some slight damage to it. I didn't pay that much money for it. I think I paid like $75 for it. But then,
Wow.
but then I went to after we moved up to Knoxville, Tennessee. There was in what's the name of the town? Unicoi County, which sadly the county seat is one that was severely damaged with Hurricane Helene last year. So I don't know if the shop is still there. It was all glass. There was no other kind of antique. It was all glass, and it was packed full. And I happened to run across another chocolate cat on a hamper for $25.
Oh my goodness.
And the nice thing about it was that the pieces with damage were opposite for my first one. So now I have a perfect one for my collection. And I've got one. The damage is not bad, so it's out there if you find, if you know what you're looking for.
I finally got the cat on the short hamper this year, which I love. And then there was a Greentown auction fairly recently, and I got the blue, the teal blue, the amber, and the green cat on a hamper because it's one of my favorites. So
Yeah.
I just need it in milk glass now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to say, Jason, thank you again. I mean, you certainly, there were things that you talked about that I had never heard before, like the whole teal blue versus cobalt and how it was used, and that was very interesting. So yeah, I certainly learned something. So, but
If you like that video, it's on YouTube. Just again, go to YouTube, search for
Okay.
Greentown Glass. It should pull up if you want to rewatch it again.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'll post this later today. As soon as we kind of we're still trying to take down Christmas stuff before we leave tomorrow morning. So
My wife's upstairs doing our stuff. She's not been down. I'm in the basement. She's not been down here yet. So.
yeah. So yeah. So like I said, our next presentation is going to be the first weekend in February. I don't remember the date off the top of my head. Kathy Stewart from the Duncan Miller Museum is going to do a presentation. I don't know what it is, but it certainly will be very good after touring that museum with her back in October. Julie and Jason, if you want, I will go ahead and send you the link to it if you want to join. Everybody's
Thank you.
welcome.
Oh.
So
Sorry.
so but I'll do that. And just to let you know, I don't know that this is new. I don't know, Dee, if you were even on that meeting. Gwinnell, I think you were. We have finally decided we are having a convention this year after last year's kind of had to get canceled because of issues that were out of our control with Springfield. We're going back to Kansas City. We are changing it though. It's going to be the first weekend in June. So I think it will work out very well. I think David Hollingshead, our vice president, is trying to get a jump on some of the other shows and conventions that happen. So that typically our convention has been the second weekend in July. So it's kind of after everybody else has had theirs through the month of June and stuff. So we're gonna see. It should be really very good. So I would hope that you want to come. Jason, you want to come and do a presentation on Greentown there too? That's great, or something. So yeah, everybody's
Real close
welcome.
to the Greentown convention.
Huh? Oh,
So
that's
that's
right.
real close to the
Yours is the
think
next
second
weekend.
weekend though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I did get up there this year. I haven't been up there for several years. I was up there this year. So yeah, I walked away with some nice pieces, so I can't complain.
Yep. Come
So,
back. Always welcome.
okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and stop. I'm going to stop the recording and we can go ahead and